So on October 12th, 2002, 4 months after Elizabeth's kidnapping, Mary Katherine is sitting in her bedroom, flipping through the pages of a Guinness World Record book, and something just dawns on her. Mary Katherine, at this point, remembered where she had heard that voice from. The voice that had taken Elizabeth. It's now dawning on her who it is. So that very same night, she goes to her parents and she goes, I know who took Elizabeth. And she tells them that it was a man named Emmanuel. So from here, we kind of jump back in time. We jump back to November 2001, just before Thanksgiving. Lois and Elizabeth were downtown near the Salt Lake Temple when they encountered an unhoused man panhandling on the street. He was well-spoken, seemed like he was just kind of down on his luck, and he told Lois that his name was Emmanuel. He asked for some money, and Lois ended up giving him $5. Lois ends up striking up more of a conversation with him, though, and at this point finds out that they are both deeply religious people. They talk about Jesus for quite some time. And Lois ends up telling him that if he needed any work, he should call her husband, Ed. And so a few days later, Emmanuel took her up on that offer. Ed told Emmanuel that he needed help fixing a skylight and the roof and doing a little bit of yard work. He ended up coming by for about 5 hours. Ed paid him $40 and sent him on his way. And Emmanuel never came back, never called again. That was it. That was the only interaction. He was such a blip in the Smart family's life that Ed hadn't even thought to include him on that list of everyone that he gave to police.
Oh, absolutely, because why would you?
I wouldn't. He never called again. 5 hours? That's it?
No.
It's forgettable. But that night, that memory of Emmanuel working on their home came back to Mary Katherine. Unfortunately, police had a very hard time believing her story. The more they questioned her, the less confident she became about him, which, okay, she's 9. Like, of course, you're going to prod her and interrogate her. Like, anyone would doubt themselves, let alone a 9-year-old. So, I don't know, maybe that's a mark. Plus, like, the more investigators look at this, there's no motive that they could think of. What motive would he had? He barely knew the family. And so even if he was somehow responsible, all they had was a first name, Emmanuel. But that brings us to clue number 5, the new sketch. Since Ed and Lois Smart had only interacted with Emmanuel briefly, months before the kidnapping, it made the task of putting together a sketch pretty difficult for them. And Ed was not happy with the first composite police used. He felt like it looked nothing like the man that they had hired. But then in November 2002, a new sketch artist arrived at the Salt Lake City Police Department looking for work. And this artist puts together what Ed and Lois describe as the perfect representation of Emmanuel. One that is just exactly as they remembered. And Ed is actually so confident in this new sketch that he wanted it released to the public immediately. He felt like this was their best chance at finding him and bringing Elizabeth home. But the police resisted. Their argument was that they didn't want to let Emmanuel know that they were on to him, which, put a botched mark on the board.
I know, it's so tough because I understand not wanting to tip someone off that you're looking for them.
You have one name. One name.
I know, but if, I could see how if Emmanuel, saw his face everywhere, he'd be like, oh, I'm just going to
change my
country or change my look.
Yeah.
I'll still mark it as botched because this whole investigation is botched, but
I mean, but what are you going to do with it then? Do you take it and go door to door?
The community needs to look out for this guy.
Exactly.
Like, we now know what he looks like.
You now have an idea. Yeah. You might have someone else in the community that has also hired Emmanuel and knows
We already know how tight this community is. Like, there's probably so many other people who have seen this person.
Exactly. Yeah. So why not put it out there and generate potential leads when you really have nothing at this point?
I know.
Well, regardless of what the Smart family wants, the detectives at this point choose to keep the sketch internal. And they even warned Ed not to share any details with the public. This really strained the family's relationship with police even further. I mean, at this point, they had been looked at themselves.
Yeah.
Things weren't moving. It had gone cold. Like, it just felt like the family wasn't really being listened to.
I know. And now the police are literally telling them to keep their biggest lead a secret.
Yeah. And Ed, he seemingly puts his faith in them. He bites his tongue, does what they asked of him, and was just going to let police do their job while he waited for news of Elizabeth. And he waited and waited some more.
Meanwhile, again, the family is continuing to be told by police, do not even breathe a word of this lead that we have. Like, keep it to yourselves, hold on to it. But as weeks go by, Ed starts getting increasingly fed up with all of the broken promises that the police have made. By this time, the Smarts had actually developed a relationship with John Walsh from America's Most Wanted. And as the father of a son who was kidnapped, John understands their pain and he wants to help the Smarts in any way that he can. So Ed confides in John and tells him about the sketch that the police have, but that they don't want to share it with the public. And Walsh decides he's going to take this into his own hands.
I have the chills, you guys. John Walsh went wild.
Yeah.
John Walsh,
really did.
He went off
good
the rails.
on him. He goes a little bit off the rails, but he knows this type of investigation probably better than the police that were investigating it because not much happened in that community.
No, and this is kind of his life mission ever since his son was abducted and killed. Like this, he knows this.
Yes. Well, towards the end of December in 2002, John Walsh goes on the Larry King Live show and he breaks the news to America that there is a sketch of a suspect. It's not anyone they've heard of before. And a future episode of America's Most Wanted is going to profile the suspect.
This was so crazy to me when I read this.
Because that he just did this?
He just went off the rails, did it. And then everyone's like, Ed. And Ed was like, yeah, I didn't know he was going to do that. Sorry.
Ed was pretty surprised when this happened. He didn't know that this segment was going to air, and he wasn't really ready to go public with the information yet. We have a quote here from him that said, I didn't know Walsh was going to do that. I'm surprised he said what he said. We were working with the police. And so you can tell that still deep in his heart, Ed is hoping that the police pull through and continue this investigation.
And seemingly he didn't want to piss the police off to where they didn't care about Elizabeth's case anymore.
Which, isn't that insane that as you're dealing with the disappearance of your daughter, you're also playing the politics game of who am I rubbing shoulders with? Who am I pissing off? Who am I? And all you want to do is find your daughter.
I know.
Towards the end of January, though, Ed does come around and he decides that the family's done waiting. On January 31st, 2003, the Smarts decide to defy the police and they're just going to show this sketch of Emanuel to the public. On February 3rd, they host a press conference where Ed and Lois explain to reporters how they had met Emanuel, and they talk about everything they know about him. They said that the deceased, Richard Reese, was most likely innocent, and they ask for the public's help in identifying Emanuel. And you know what? This gamble really pays off for them. Because on February 7th, just 3 days after this press conference, an LDS Temple employee in Salt Lake City named Tom Holbrook sees a picture of this sketch. And what do you think happened? I mean, this is what we were talking about with a community this small. He gets home from work and he shows this article to his wife, Lisa, and they both know the man in that sketch very, very, very well because, quote, Emanuel was Lisa's brother, Brian David Mitchell. Who is Brian David Mitchell, though? Brian David Mitchell was born in Salt Lake City in October of 1953. He was one of 6 children. His father was a mostly absent, kind of wannabe preacher with pretty bizarre ideas and a very violent streak. As a kid, Brian was described as being a loner and an attention seeker. In high school, he was actually sent to juvie because he exposed himself to a 4-year-old neighbor. He also has a track record of stealing, of drinking, of using drugs. At 16 years old, he dropped out of school, and then 3 years later, he got his girlfriend pregnant, and he married her. It is weird now, going through his information again, how many similarities he has to Charles Manson. I don't know how much you know about Manson's backstory, but it's really similar.
Wow.
They ended up splitting up after they had their second child together, and rather than go through the process of fighting for custody of the children, he just abducted them and fled to New Hampshire. And while he was there, the 20-year-old took LSD for the first time, and at least according to him, he has this kind of spiritual epiphany when this happens.
Yeah, acid will do that to you.
Well, acid and mental illness will do that to you. Although he had not been a religious person like his parents, this acid trip awakened something in him. And he decides after this moment that he has been called back to the Mormon faith. Brian decides he's going to return to Salt Lake City and he's going to start attending regular meetings at the LDS Church. In 1981, he marries a woman named Debbie Woodridge. She had 3 daughters from a previous marriage, and they broke up in 1985 after Debbie suspected that he was sexually assaulting her children. Hours after this divorce is finalized, 32-year-old Brian married a 39-year-old woman named Wanda Barzee. Just like Brian, Wanda was also a very religious person. She was raised in the LDS Church. Her connection to God was the only reliable thing in her life, it seems like. Everything else around her was chaos. She was prone to these very violent mood swings. She sometimes would go days on end without sleeping. She would have blowout fights with her previous husband. But it seemed like Brian saw something in her that he maybe also saw in himself. He was kind of like the Wanda whisperer in a way, because when she would have these really intense mood swings and maybe would get violent, he would just lay his hands on her head and he would utter a blessing. And this would like immediately calm her down. Whatever he asked her to do after this, she would give. And wherever he went, she would follow. But I mean, as you can imagine, he starts leading Wanda down a very dark path once he realizes kind of the power that he has over her.
Yeah.
In the late 1980s, Brian becomes more interested in fringe Mormon and libertarian groups, ones that talked a lot about prophecies. They preached that the apocalypse was near, that someone strong and mighty would come and rescue the Mormon church from sin. Sometime around 1993, Brian has this epiphany, and he really becomes convinced that he is the anointed leader foretold in all of these prophecies. After this, he quits his job, he grows out his beard, he spends most of his time preaching his own personal take on Mormon scripture. He also changes his name to Emmanuel, and that's significant in the Mormon church because it's another word for Jesus. I have here that it's from the Hebrew word that means God with us. And you know, with him being a prophet, his wife becomes the wife of a great prophet, and she takes on the name Hephzibah. They start putting on robes. They pretty much abandon the children, and they travel cross country as these really like traveling preachers. They beg for money. They stay with family and friends wherever they can. And the rest of the time, they're just sleeping in their cars or somewhere out in the woods. When Lois Smart met Brian in November of 2001, he was panhandling near an LDS temple. By that point, he had alienated almost all of his family and friends. All of them were also Mormon, but they just didn't belong to this extreme sect that he belonged to. Even his mom, who had tolerated his rants for years, ended up taking a restraining order out against him in April of 2002 after he and Wanda became abusive. That incident was less than 2 months before Elizabeth Smart disappeared. And since then, Brian's family had not wanted anything to do with him. They didn't know where he was. They didn't really care to find out. They were not interested. But then in February of 2003, they open up their newspapers and see his face splashed there. On February 7th, which, I mean, if we're keeping track now, it's 8 months after Elizabeth Smart's abduction, Brian's sister, Lisa, calls 911 and she tells them that she believes the kidnapper is her brother.